Welcome, everybody. It is such a joy, thrill to be here with you all. My name is Aisling Clardy. I work with the UNESCO Chair in Inclusive Physical Education, Sport, Recreation and Fitness at the Munster Technological University in Ireland. And this Q&A session is being brought to you on behalf of UNESCO ICM in South Korea, the International Centre of Martial Arts for Youth Development and Engagement. So this is the fourth session in a series of webinars that UNESCO ICM are leading, facilitating. And this session is all about questions and answers. So we have some of our panelists from the previous webinars, which were all so jam-packed that we didn't always get around to the questions and answers. So we have taken any questions that have already been submitted. And of course, we're here with you so that you can ask questions live. I see some people are still joining us. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good evening. I know we have an international audience. And of course, then we also have people who will be listening to the recording. So as we are getting ready, we have good evening from India. Good evening, Manaj. Thank you for your message in the chat. So I will let you know the run of the show today. So what we'll be doing, so this is all Q&A. We do have some questions already submitted, as I said. And you, all of those who are attending live, you have two options to connect. So of course, the chat, you can always pop into the chat, but if you have a question that you'd like to be asked, there is along the bottom on there, you should see a tab with all of the Zoom functions. There's a Q&A button. If you click on that, you can type your question in there. I do believe you can ask a question anonymously or with your name. So whichever is best for you. Also, there is an option if you really wish to have a conversation or ask a question, you can raise your hand. And if we get a chance, we'll get around to you and we can bring you on here so you can ask your question live and speak with some of our panelists. And we still have people joining. Welcome, welcome all of you. Kate Mila Falta, which is actually the Irish for welcome. It means 100,000 welcomes. And I wish I had all of your languages, but unfortunately I don't. So just to introduce, so we can get started here. So we have some of our speakers. So those of you who have been joining and following all of the previous webinars, as I said, this is the fourth one. We have already had 3 really fantastic webinars covering different topics. So we have today with us, we have Yumi Kim. Yumi has a black belt in Taekwondo, and she is just in the process of completing her PhD in adaptive physical activity in the University of Alabama. Yumi was on our first webinar which was titled APA and UDL, Adaptive Physical Activity and Universal Design for Learning. And Yumi presented on adaptive physical activity and where martial arts fits inside of that field. And then we also have Nick Hoekstra. Nick he's a black belt judoka. He's currently doing his PhD in special education at the University of Kansas. Nick has a huge resume and has a lot of expertise in the topic. He has so much expertise and perspective to bring that he has already sat on all panels so far, including the adaptive physical activity and the UDL, where he spoke about universal design for learning. And Nick is fully blind, so he spoke on the panelists on webinar 2, which was about the athlete's perspective. And he has also traveled extensively, lived in Japan, in other countries, doing many different martial arts. And so he also attended and spoke on the webinar on tradition and inclusion, where he shared his perspective too. We also have Dr. George Jennings, a senior lecturer in sports sociology in Cardiff Metropolitan University. Dr. Jennings is an expert in martial arts, and he's also on UNESCO ICM's advisory committee. And Dr. Jennings sat on our most recent panel and led the conversation on the history of martial arts in the context of tradition. We were also to be joined by Samantha Lunsford, who has a black belt in karate, and she was a panelist also on the Athlete's Perspective webinar. But unfortunately, for reasons outside of her control, she couldn't join us here today. But she is hopeful that she'll be able to attend another Q&A session. We have 2 more, one for the public and one for the UNESCO ICM's MARI participants. So she's hoping to attend that 3rd Q&A session, which is later in August. So without further ado, I would like to give each of the panelists a few minutes to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive right into the questions. So Yumi, would you like to please introduce yourself? And just to share some background, and so our attendees will know where to jump in and ask your expertise.
Yes. Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining to this webinar. Thank you for the great introduction, Aisling. My name is Yumi. I'm originally came from Korea and moved to the state, California, for higher education about 10 years ago by now. My major is kinesiology, and I'm specialized for adapted physical activity that mainly promote exercise and physical activity for people with various disabilities or chronic conditions. For this webinar, I can help to answer the things that are suggested to do or do not for certain physical limitations, impairment, or disability and disease-specific questions, fitness and exercise-related benefits and needs, also adaptation, modification, or accommodation of movement, or special martial art gears and tools. Thank you.
Thank you, Yumi. Fantastic. And Nick, would you like to share with us, please?
Sure. So thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Aisling, for the wonderful introductions. And yeah, so as Aisling mentioned, I have quite an extensive past in martial arts. I started training wrestling when I was in high school. Well, first off, I guess I should say I lost my sight when I was 7 years old. And when I got a little bit older, I found sports to be a great way to build self-esteem, fitness, and also community. So I started wrestling when I was in high school, and after that, practiced Aikido for 10 plus years, and eventually found Judo when I was living in Japan, and now I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But kind of the common thread through it all is that martial arts for me have been super important for the development of my character, and I attribute practice of the martial arts to be a large reason for why I'm able to pursue a PhD. There's skills that you learn while you're training martial arts that really help develop your character, your ability to just devote time to things and fight through challenges. And my career and my education has been in inclusive and special education. So my PhD is in special education, and I'm really interested in how to promote inclusive education, not only kind of here in the United States, but especially around the world in a low income and low resource context. And it is so wonderful for me to find this kind of intersection between my two passions in life, education and the martial arts. So that is kind of my background.
Thank you, Nick. And Dr. Jennings?
Hello, everybody. I'm George Jennings. So like many people who do, I'm a martial arts researcher. So like many martial arts scholars, I started off as a practitioner. So I began as a teenager with Taekwondo, and I got into Wing Chun, which was my main martial arts, but I also looked into Tai Chi, a bit of Judo, a bit of Kendo as well. And basically my research started to look into the Chinese martial arts as transformative practices, often, but like my colleagues here, often with positive experiences, why people continue training for long periods of time. And I also was able to go to Mexico and study a martial art there, which is called Shilam, which is a recently invented martial art. And when I came back to the UK, I wanted to continue looking at different systems. And I'm looking at Tai Chi Chuan, and historical European martial arts, better known as HEMA, and then looking at their pedagogy, so the way they're taught and whether people are learning them, particularly through language. I'm quite interested in language, and the moment, particularly humor as well. So how humor is embedded inside the pedagogy. So different types of jokes, very specific to the culture, to the philosophy of the group. And that's what I'm looking at the moment. Yeah, so it's very nice to be here because it's my second panel, and great to be working with the team here. So looking forward to chatting.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have all of you. I cannot say how grateful we am. You know, you've all been so great in sharing your knowledge and your wisdom, and to be here for rapid fire questions. Well, not so rapid fire. So, but we do have a lot of questions. I'm seeing some coming through. I see one of you have been adding to the chat. I see your question, but just to say, it is better if you put them into the Q&A just to make sure that we don't miss them there, because that's where we'll actually be looking for the questions. So shall we dive right in? Are we ready? Our panelists, are you ready for some questions? So one that just came through here, I mean, as I said, we do have some that were already sent through. So there's one here that was just sent through for you specifically, Yumi. And the question is, what sort of performing activity you require in Taekwondo for differently abled athletes? That is from, now if you need clarification, we can ask. So let me just see. That is from our attendee in India. What sort of performing activity do you require in Taekwondo? Are you understanding the question, or do you need some?
Let's say, so what can be different in Taekwondo for people with disabilities compared to able-bodied athletes? Is that the question?
That's what I'm hearing in the question. That's from Manoj. So is that, if you can just share with us if that's what what you mean by the question? Manoj, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. But yeah, that's what I would say. What would be the differences and how you would support somebody?
I see. Well, this is really broad question. Well, thank you for sharing the previous YouTube link, the first webinar link. So I'll just bring back the couple of examples that I shared before. So mainly when we are talking about the disabilities in the previous webinar, one of the question was people who use the wheelchair and how we can adapt the movement for especially kicking. Taekwondo has a lot of kicking movements, and how can we adapt that? So I previously emphasized that let's say, here is another. Say a person is not good enough to take balance and fit. How you allow that person to doing Taekwondo? Thank you. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Yes, this is actually a great question. So we can, in terms of the field of adapted physical activity, our aim is to try to achieve and perform the movement, not exactly in the same way, but in a best way that they can do and safely, as well as close as to maximize the benefit out of it. So if the person has balance issue and if the safety is concerned, I would like to suggest to use some just the additional balance bar that the studio potentially can have. Like if I remember right, even in the US private studios, like all the studios has those surrounding bars around the studio except the mirror side. Yeah, and they usually hang a lot of gears, belt, jumping ropes on that bar, but that can be actually cleared, and that bar can be used for additional support for the kicking movement. If we need more support, that person can practice the movement in the sitting position. And going back to the initial discussion, it's okay to practice the kicking movement in the sitting position if the full kicking is hard, even the lifting the legs lifting the thighs toward the chest to replace the kicking movement is okay to practice. Did I answer your question?
Well, and we have a response in karate. So wheelchair competition for differently abled athletes or athletes with disabilities. What else in judo or in other martial arts? Well, and I was going to add it as well. You know, what about somebody, Yumi, would you be able to share any insight in somebody who doesn't have the functioning of their legs at all? Say if they're paralyzed from the hip, the waist down, what could be done there in terms of kicking movements?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So kicking doesn't mean that we have to use the leg. We can actually replace the kicking movement that has been already engraved within the series of movement. In Taekwondo, we call that as pumse. And we can replace that movement with upper body bend movement. If there is a kicking, we can replace it with bend toward the direction of where the kicking is going. Or we can replace with the punching movement at the same timing where the kicking is happening. So if it is front kick, I will say either raise the arms toward the front or replace with like uppercut movement where the kicking is going. If it is a side kick, we can replace with the side lift arm or replace with the hook movement. So we can replace that each movement at the right timing.
Thank you, Yumi. And so the response was your answer was satisfactory, but to come back, so the additional, there was another add on to the question. Maybe Nick, you could come in. So he'd asked further to that same question, what about judo? Or maybe Dr. Jennings, even other martial arts as well. Maybe you could come in there as well.
Would you like to go first, Nick? Or...
Yeah, sure, I can. It depends on, obviously each person's physical limitations are going to be unique to them. So there's no one way to adapt everything, but the key is really just looking at what is our goal for that person's practice. If I've worked with a number of people with upper body limitations, especially in judo or Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And in those cases with upper body limitations, there are completely feasible and effective ways to adapt a judo throw, just focusing on different ways to off balance your opponent. You know, if you're only using one arm, we have to think about focusing on, okay, like how are we shifting our hips in order to generate more pull with the one good arm? Or, you know, what way are we grabbing the other person's gi, the other person's clothing in order to make the most effective grip so that we can generate a pull or a push? In the case of like an upper body limitation with lower body limitations, again, judo has a whole variety of things that are on the ground that involve just using the arms to generate chokes, that generate triangles. So really just depends on what the person's physical limits might be, and then thinking about, okay, well, what is our goal for this person's training? And obviously, the important aspect is to just not think of ourselves, not to consider any martial art or any technique within a martial art as one fixed, you know, I think it's going back to a little bit of what Yumi said. We're not trying to, you know, the purpose is not to exactly imitate an exact kata or exact technique. It's, okay, how can we make this technique fit the movements and the abilities of each individual? So it requires a little bit of creativity and a little bit of thinking about, you know, what's going to generate the best training for this individual, the best, you know, physical fitness for this individual, and is going to also kind of most adequately or most accurately also then represent the martial art itself.
That's great, Nick. I'll just add on that, maybe in the Chinese martial arts, there's a lot of work with partner training. So Wing Chun, for example, type of kung fu, it has sticking hands, or chi sao in Cantonese. So this is normally done with two hands, or it could also be done with one hand, where you circle around or inside the opponent's arm. And so if they are able to use their upper body, but not their lower body, you can adapt this to seated chi sao. So I've seen this on two stools or maybe in a wheelchair. and both people be facing each other, square on shoulders, and they'd be doing a rolling drill and try to do gentle hits towards the opponent, and they would deflect with their technique. Equally, there's also the chi gurk, the sticky leg drill, which is used for sensitivity of kicks, knees, and leg blocks. Which is, for example, if you didn't have one arm or both arms, you could use this drill, which is often actually underused really in many Wing Chun schools. So it's something that we should do. So we can easily adapt the sensitivity and the structures. And Nick mentioned triangles. Different principle in Wing Chun is a triangular shape. And the economy of motion, all these kind of principles, simultaneous attack and defense in some cases, could be worked on. So as long as you're working with the principles and the core concepts, you're doing Wing Chun. And the same would be said for Tai Chi Chuan, the idea of letting go and releasing and focusing, some of the sort of psychophysical principles. As long as you're following those principles, you'll be doing Tai Chi Chuan. So again, Tai Chi, pushing hands is similar to Wing Chun in that sense as a drill, a cooperative drill, which can be competitive. So I know the question was also linking to competition. But you could adapt some of those principles and ideas. If someone only had one hand or one arm, or they have to do an activity from a seated position. So definitely there's flexibility within the systems, and they have evolved over time to be more flexible. For example, Wing Chun, not all the lineages had sticking legs, but over time, students of different masters have developed these drills, and now the seated chi sao, again, it's not that common, but I've seen videos of it. I know my teacher's teacher does that in some seminars. And even three-way sticking drills are being created as well. So there's lots of things you could do really to adapt, as long as you, again, stick to those core principles.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah. So I suppose what I'm hearing a lot in what a common thread in what you're saying is, sticking to the core principles. What is the end goal? What is the end outcome of the intended movement, and being adaptive, being flexible and meeting the needs, working with the needs of the person who's there with you. So we have another question from Stephanie Stevens, and this was a question from one of our previous webinars. So, and she's here with us as well live. Hi, Stephanie, and thank you for the question. So she wrote, as a martial artist, I understand the kind of hands-on individual training that can happen, but I also know that there tend to be larger classes. What kind of things can coaches or group instructors do in the context of a larger class to A, support a participant with a disability, and B, not single out a participant in a negative way? And just to add, she adds here that she's watching she's joining in because she's because of an American national standard that she's helping to write. So she's trying to wrap her head around this beyond her own experience of learning and teaching. Go ahead, Nick, I see you're ready.
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in with this. So I was thinking about this previously. So this is a super important question. And I think it's what Stephanie highlights in the way she asks it, because we don't want to single out either. So we have to be a little bit careful about, so let me first off give the example of myself being blind. When an instructor demonstrates, that doesn't necessarily provide me too much benefit, unless they're really, at this point I've been doing martial arts for so long, if I know more or less what technique and they're describing it while they're doing it or providing keywords, then I can kind of follow along. But if we're dealing with somebody who's very new to a martial art and they might be visually impaired, and the instructor demonstrating that doesn't benefit them. So one thing that often happens at this point is I am often used as the person who is being demonstrated on. So that's great for me. I can feel what the instructor is doing, and this is in large classes. So I feel what the person's doing while everyone else is watching normally. So that is really great. However, we also want to point out that you can't always do that, because for different purposes, an instructor might want to, this is in the case of a partner activity where you're demonstrating with a partner. You don't always want to use the same individual for various reasons. Sometimes you're looking to demonstrate with a different body type, with a different, with a person at a different level. So you can't always use the person with a disability as kind of the uke is what the word we use in Japanese, but as the person that you're demonstrating with. Okay, so next steps. One thing that's really important, especially when you have a new, not only with a new person, but especially when you have a new member of a gym or of a club, is that you want to make sure to partner that person with a senior student, with somebody who has some experience in the gym, who is going to be able to work with them and teach them adequately and responsibly. the one thing that I've sometimes seen and that we really want to avoid is when you have somebody new, or when you have somebody with a disability who's, you know, trying out a martial art for the first time, don't partner that person with the other white belt or with the other, you know, novice student, because then you're putting a lot of responsibility on the other novice student, and you're also not giving the student with a disability, you know, adequate instruction, because in a sense they're getting secondhand instruction from somebody else who's also learning. So I think there's two things we can consider. The instructor can try to vary how they present, either by speaking clearly, demonstrating in such a way that we can reach a broader audience, speaking, visually demonstrating, doing things, you know, multiple times, facing different directions, or we can use the person with a disability as the demonstrating partner. And third, make sure that we partner the student with someone in the class who is experienced, and not partner them with somebody who's brand new. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Nick. And would anybody else, I saw a lot of nodding heads there, Yumi and Dr. Jennings. So if any of you would like to come in, is there anything you'd like to add, or are you okay with Nick's response?
I mean, I would second it. I don't know if Yumi, if you've got any of their examples, but I think he's great. I was going to respond to what Nick was saying, really, particularly with the using a senior student, a very able, either an assistant instructor who's been trained and prepared to help with a class and is willing to, and has a kind of the attitude, really good attitude to share in the class. And the class has that ethos. And particularly, I often find that instructors do work in teams. They do have to develop a protege sometimes, or sometimes they can work with as couples. So there's a lot of martial arts groups run by couples, like my fencing instructor, and often the men instructor designs the class, and then his wife helps a lot with beginners, which really helps them with the cutting drills. And then other senior students walk around and help. Even if there are people who are injured or do not have everything, they often come and help out or observe, to check on things. So having that community of practice is really important, where people help out even if they're not able to train that day. Sorry, Yumi, I don't know if you're going to add something.
Yes, thank you. Well, I really love that the group activity idea, and more guidance from the senior belt student. I think one of the important thing that I would like to add to the next point is how the instructor is actually setting the tone of the class from the day one when they jumped into the martial art. So, I mean, everyone has different idea, but when we go to the martial art studio and when we often practice martial art, I think the line between the respect and obey is kind of unclear. So if the instructor is really setting the tone of the class for support, collaboration, trustworthy, and respect, but not just like complete obey to the higher belt student and the instructor, I think those group class teaching will be a bit easier. I think I just touched very controversial topic, but that's something what I think. And adding to the group class or one-on-one, the senior teaching classes, one thing that we often tried is to line up the students into 2 lines, and one line of a student actually rotate. So when we do that, one line of a student has more higher belt of a student, and another line of a student have a little bit lower rank of the belt student, and we practice movement, and the lower belt students are keep rotating to the right. So they can practice with many different people, and while they are rotating into rotating the line. So this kind of setting is of course works better when you have like half and half, higher and lower class, lower belt students in one class. But if you have equal, almost equal number of setting, I would like to suggest to you to try that rotating mechanism too.
Thank you, Yumi. And just to add, I also popped into the chat. So there's a link. There is a module, in case any of you aren't aware, on UNESCO ICM site for an e-learning module that was developed. So there's free suite of modules or units on there that you can go through that have a lot of principles as well, and some of a lot of what we've spoke about here. And I know there's also in there the inclusion spectrum, which is a model that's very useful for setting up your session. So there's the open, so that some aspects of the session where everyone's all doing the same, maybe like the warm up or cool down. And then, you know, you can set the group into different, you know, you could have a separate setting or parallel sessions where you break into groups and they're all doing a similar activity at different levels according to ability, where it can be done in a way where you're not actually singling out anybody, or in some cases a separate, you know, in some cases somebody who's learning a skill might benefit from being separate from the group, or, you know, in a way where they can build skills and then be joined the larger group. I think it really boils down to the needs of the group. You know, if you had if there's one or two people with a disability in the session or with needs, additional needs, or if you had a session that was predominantly for people, you know, maybe a group of people with visual impairments, obviously then you'd need more supports there. But thank you all, everybody. I think there's a lot of insight there and a lot of information there, Stephanie, in response to your question. And you can also reach out to us as well directly if you need any further support. So let's come back to some questions. There is a question in Spanish. I'm not sure if any of our panelists speak Spanish. And I don't. Oh, Nick, would you be able to address this? Can you see the question from Maria Elena?
Is it in the Q&A part?
Yes. Can you see that?
Give me 1 second. Let me check.
I can pop it into the chat if that's easy for you.
I can also speak Spanish, a bit rusty, but I should be able to read it. Try my best to respond, but add to what Nick says.
Yeah, George, if you can read it, that'd be great. You're fast. You'll probably find it faster.
Yeah, no worries. Hasn't gone through yet, but things.
Here, I can pop it into the chat if you'll see it more easily there. Let's see.
Yes, please.
There you go.
Okay.
Oh, so you're saying that Stephanie said, perfect, thank you. It's been helpful to help me wrap her head around it, and we'll circulate the course in preparation.
Oh, okay. She's asking if we can put the subtitles in Spanish. Yeah.
Oh, we actually, can we do that? I'm not aware that we can. Unfortunately, I don't think we can.
I don't know if Zoom has that functionality at this point. I don't believe it does.
Apologies about that.
Yeah.
So shall we come back to another question?
Yeah, sure. And if you wanted to ask us a question, sorry, in Spanish, we could also try to respond to you now.
Sure.
Sorry, actually, to interrupt, but yeah. If you feel uncomfortable asking in English.
And so if you are going to submit another question in Spanish, please do so. You can do that in the Q&A. We'll move on to, as that's happening, will we just come back to one of the other questions that we had. So Adnan Lamti from Ghana submitted this question this morning. He couldn't be with us here live. So he asked, do the members of your class with special needs come from rich homes? I'm assuming that such poor families don't have access to martial arts trainings. So there's two questions, I'll read them both out. And do you sometimes find yourself giving more time to members of the special needs, members with special needs, and then those without? And as they do, some require more attention. If so, how does this affect your delivery? And I think some of that might have been addressed in the previous question a little bit. But would anybody like to come in there and to address maybe the socioeconomic context of that question?
You want to go first, Yumi?
Go ahead.
You sure, or Nick? Or,
yeah.
I mean, I could brief. I mean, it might depend on the country in question, because most of my research has been done in Britain, and I guess I mentioned Mexico. And it might depend on the martial art, the club. I mean, generally, I find martial arts fairly affordable, apart from those that require quite a lot of equipment. For example, historical European martial arts, there's a lot of safety equipment involved, a lot of different weapons they teach. So you've got to learn a broad, a long sword, a side sword, and you might get your own shield, and that does cost quite a bit of money. But although a lot of the people actually who practice it are generally, you probably would say, working class or lower middle class people, not that high income really, but they choose to spend, because it's such a lifestyle practice, they spend a lot of their affordable income on this activity, rather than maybe getting a car or going on a foreign holiday, etc. So because they're so passionate about the topic. And I found that also Wing Chun, the group I studied with, quite a working class community. So classes might be they might charge them per the class. On my Tai Chi class, the teacher, he asks just to pay on the day, and it's £5 to Tai Chi, or £8 added total if you do the Qigong class. So it's generally affordable according to, say, the minimum wage in the UK. So I think that I don't think it's a barrier so much in many styles, but I think Olympic fencing, things like that, are a lot more expensive to do Western fencing, sport fencing. Yeah, I think generally it's not too much of a barrier, what I've observed. But in terms of disabilities, I think people with different requirements do come from a range of backgrounds. I know one who's come quite an affluent background from near London. She's come across for studies, and she has a hypermobility, and she can't train at certain periods where it's really bad. But she does come from a more affluent background. But as other students have come, I think one of our students used to be homeless actually, and she also has some issues of eczema and mental health issues and other things, and she has trained for quite a while. So I would say it varies. I wouldn't say, I don't know what the other colleagues say about what they've observed.
Thank you, Dr. Jennings. Would you like to come in there, Nick?
I think if Yumi had something to add, I'd love for her to go first, just to read out.
I love how respectful you all are of each other. You're sharing the space.
No, I will let you go, Nick, first. Yes, please.
Okay. My experience, it really depends. Culturally, this is so different from country to country. I think where you would run into, depending on the type of disability, there are just a number of places in the world where people with disabilities are protected still quite a bit. And I think that is especially, I don't know if you would, I think because of the tendency to protect people with disabilities, I don't know if there's really much of a difference between whether people come from a higher class or lower class kind of background. However, I do think building a little bit off of what Dr. Jennings was saying, George was saying, I have seen people with different disabilities from lower class, from lower income, I should say, backgrounds, getting into the martial arts, because it is something, at least depending on the martial art that you do, something like judo, something like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, even Aikido, the three martial arts I practice don't require much in the line of equipment. So they're generally speaking very open to low-income individuals. And with that, I have seen, I guess, a wide range of people, some people with mental health issues, as George was saying, as well as people with even cognitive disabilities that are getting involved. And I have not noticed any income differences in that regard, because specifically the martial arts that I practice are quite widely affordable and widely available. And also even one of my initial judo clubs, we specifically did outreach into communities that were low income communities to get more students in, to the extent where we provided even the clothing, we provided the gi for people to train in, and they were washed at our club after each practice. So we made efforts to try to especially get people from low income in neighborhoods and environments.
For me, well, I would like to share first, like how I started martial art. So when I started Taekwondo, I didn't walk into the class and paid and sign up the classes. Actually, one of grandmaster from a private studio in our community, he came to our elementary school and volunteered to provide unique free PE classes for the student. So that's how I signed up the martial art class, and then I liked it and walked into the studio and continued it. I think that kind of setting, the startup setting for me was very natural. So when I came to the States, I got a lot of requests for the community demonstrations and community teach for children with disabilities in the church setting, in the YMCA, and all over the place. And I started going out and practice it and teach it together. I understand all the different types of martial art requires different gears and it can be expensive, but we are here really talking about the adaptation and the different modifications for people with disabilities. So I think we can be a little clever for replacing that gears with something else that can be practiced in a similar way, or maybe in a cheaper, or maybe get rid of it. Maybe get rid of that gear and replace that practice with something else to give more access to people with disabilities, that lower economic setting that we are talking now.
Thank you very much, Yumi, and each of you for your responses. You know, there's a lot of, I can hear your different perspectives there. I'd also like to add actually to this point as well. I think it can, obviously it depends on your context, what country you're in, you know, even what is available for yourself. But I think if you have a club yourself, or you know, if you work in a club, you could encourage taking a look at your policies and processes. For example, you know, do you have a policy that if you have a discounted rate for people on a low income, if that's a possibility? Do you have a policy there that if somebody with a disability who needs a support person to come with them, that person can come for free? You know, they wouldn't necessarily be participating in the class, but they might be there to support the person if needed. Or even just to be there on site in case, you know, to be close at hand in case the person needed, or maybe they needed support with changing before and after. So even just looking at the policies and processes like that, and possibly even if there are local or government grants that could be available to support as well. Sometimes that's a possibility in terms of, you know, getting funding for equipment. But as Yumi was saying, you don't always need the expensive equipment. I think what's most important is the inclusive attitude, the willingness to work with people and to be inclusive. It's a mindset rather than once it becomes a way of being rather than something that you're doing, there's a shift there and you'll find the way. And so we have another question, unless any of you would like to add anything further. Are we ready for the next question? So we have a question from Marcella Paiva. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Marcella. So what is written here, this is a great series of events. Thank you very much. We've addressed a lot of how to face an inclusive training environment. How can we bring in a more diverse group of people to the dojo or the gym? Is there an opportunity of broadening the positive impact of martial arts in our communities using an inclusive approach? And do you think is more challenging for martial arts to adopt these principles versus other activities? Thank you. Well, and I'll come in with what I had written down there, even in response to add on. I'm not sure I actually said it out loud. You know, working in partnerships, like what Yumi was saying, working with schools, working, you know, if you wish to become inclusive, you could work with a disability service and forge an alliance there. You could come to some sort of agreement and connect with very strategically or specifically with groups in the community that you wish to work with. But would you like to come in? And Nick, it looked like you had something to say there, or any of you, just indicate.
I can definitely come in. I want to just second both you and Yumi. When I first out of high school got into Aikido, it was because the Aikido program had done an outreach to my school, where they had just come to my school and did my school had like a day of events where it was, you know, just try different activities, and Aikido was one of the activities that was represented, and that's how I even heard about it to begin with. But beyond that, like the judo dojo where I trained in Michigan, again, it was built, we could have set up the judo dojo anywhere, but the head instructor chose to work with a local Salvation Army group, which for people not in the US, the Salvation Army is like a, I think it's kind of like a charity run organization where they provide oftentimes services for people in low income areas. And we set up our dojo within a physical fitness center that was built in an area where it was much more low income area. But because of that, also, we were in an area where there were a wide diversity of people from different cultures represented. And as an activity one day, when we were doing a warm-up exercise, we were counting in each person's native language, and we had something like 15 different languages represented in our kids class. So just to give you an idea. So yeah, it's what Yumi had said, excuse me, it's what Ashleen had said. It's what Yumi had said. It's these sort of outreach things, and really it has to come from the top. You know, you have to create a welcoming environment. You have to have an instructor that is welcoming to students from everywhere, whether they be students from other cultures or students with disabilities. That comes from the top, and we have to make sure that within our gym, within our dojo, that we're creating that warm, welcoming environment, and every student is part of that. You know, that every student is friendly, is welcoming, and that we don't have, you know, any discrimination, any negative kind of attitudes within that. Because that has to be number one. You know, our gyms have to be a place that is welcoming.
Thank you, Nick. I suppose the gyms or the dojo's philosophy and their policies that are really embedded inside of that. Anybody else like to come in there? I see you nodding your head, Dr. Jennings or Yumi.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to go first, Yumi, or do you want me?
Yes, thank you. Yep. So, just adding to the Nick's point, I think that tryout period and accessibility from the upfront is really the key for whoever starting the martial art, whether they have disability or not. So the one thing that I tried, one thing that I surprised actually came to the States when I found a private studio and going out, tried to sign up for just practice for my own. And it was actually working like a membership. I'm not sure the entire world is working that way, except Korea. But in Korea, we sign up martial artist studio. It always goes monthly plan, month by month. And if you want to quit, you can quit anytime. But I was surprised that in the States, all the private studio is requiring like a 1 year, 2 year contract, and then like a pay monthly. Oh, sorry, Nick is shaking. Not everywhere is working that way. Okay, yeah. So I think going back to the community outreach, like it is kind of intimidating that people jump into the martial art classes, and when people are demonstrating higher skills and make a big sound, and they're like, yeah. So I think that community, in a more comfortable community setting, like try out things, and it actually help them to easy to dive into the next level. So as Nick said, I think it really should come from the top, and the community outreach effort should be really made.
Great. Thanks, Yumi. I think it's really good about the outreach, because I think that the big challenge for instructors is that often they're working on their own, because many, particularly the martial arts I tend to study, like the Chinese martial arts or kind of more historical revivalist movements, there's not really a unified governing body, unlike some other martial arts where they might be, going to the Olympics, they may have some lottery funding or some of the government support. So a lot of it's grassroots, very initiatives that And then the ones I'm currently studying, doing ethnographic research, which I go and take part in the class as a student. I take notes about how it's, the happenings, the discussions. They're all in, let's say, one's in a YMCA in a very multicultural area, but the actual demographic of the students generally is very white, British, with a few ethnic minorities now and again, but not really many, although it's very gender inclusive. So a lot of martial arts might focus a lot in their culture about one type of inclusivity. So at the moment, HEMA, it's very much about gender, non-binary as well. They have events for women, people of different identities, but not so much about, because it's a European fencing art, they maybe attract white people who are interested in their history, their lineage, their ancestry. And in Tai Chi, though it's a Chinese martial art, in Britain at least, most of the main teachers, better known teachers, and their organizations are white British people. And most of the class happen to be white, more middle class in Tai Chi actually, even though it's quite cheap. So again, they probably need to and we do actually train in a primary school where the demographic of the children is actually very much South Asian, Middle Eastern backgrounds, and a refugee center as well, a kind of help center. So there were obviously people from different countries like Syria and Jordan, etc. But the demographic of the students again is very white. Although we do have Polish and European students, primarily white. So again, there's a challenge there, I think, for other types of inclusivity as well as we talk about different physical abilities, mental abilities, etc. So I think there's an ongoing challenge really, because there's a tendency to focus on one type of inclusivity, which is good because of historical discrimination of certain groups. But then there's, at the same time, there's a hidden, perhaps exclusivity or perceived exclusivity, of what possibly driven by the media as well, and what we consider these activities to be. So yeah, definitely it's going to take a long time, but I think we can, by working with outside organizations and advisory boards, that would help a lot.
Can I really quickly, before we move on, just second something also that Yumi said regarding the membership things? I just want to emphasize that too. Like, I've trained at a place where there was a year-long contract just to try out the martial art, and that excludes people immediately. I mean, that's going to exclude people who can't afford it. That's going to exclude people who've never tried it. And it's not, unfortunately, I've seen it in a couple places here in the United States. I think I've only ever seen it in the United States, but typically the places where I've stayed and where I've trained longest don't do that. And with good reason, because, we get new students every week where I currently train, because you can come in and just train, for free for a day to see if you like it, and come in for a couple times and make sure you're comfortable with it before you subscribe to anything. And when you do join, it's only a monthly subscription. You can stop at any time. I think that's hugely important for just getting people in the door and opening it up to a wider audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Coming back to your payment policies and processes, are you making it easy for people or not? Especially if you want to attract new people. And I really love what you said there, Dr. Jennings, because I think a lot of the time when people start, I know when in the field of disability inclusion is the way, so that was always my focus originally. But then as you start to build your competence in one area, then you start to think, oh, are there other groups that I haven't been consciously including? It doesn't mean you're excluding them, but, you could be subconsciously or unintentionally. And it's just a process, isn't it? It really is a journey that you continue. And I don't think we can beat ourselves up about when in the process of learning and evolution, you can look back and say, oh my gosh, I was doing some things that were very exclusive. However, you just keep moving on and learning and being open to learn and realizing, being humble. And I think that was mentioned earlier. One of you mentioned that. So we do have another question. Actually, there's a question here in the Q&A and one just came through there. So I know we're coming close to the end of our time, but I'm wondering, will we have we might go over a minute or two just to address these two more questions that have come through. So to follow up, if that's okay with you, all of you. Yeah, we got a thumbs up from each of you. Thank you. So the follow-up question from Stephanie Stevens regarding tone. She wrote, my sensei used to really focus on every strength has a weakness, used it fairly effectively to show how there were a lot of different elements that went into being a martial artist. We had a range of ages from 5 to 70 with students with visual impairments, cognitive impairments, emotional challenges, and mobility impairments. what sayings or other ways have you seen to be useful in establishing an inclusive environment? Do we have, I see you nodding your head there, Nick, or do any of you, would you like to come in there?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think it's seeing the strength in what others might perceive as a weakness. The very first day I walked into the club where I'm currently at, they were using blindfolds to help people just work on a little bit of balance. And the person who was running the class was so embarrassed when I came in because their thought was, oh my God, I'm using blindfolds and a blind person just walked in. What are they going to think? And I said, that's great. You know, it's an activity I've done every club that I've trained at. You know, it's we can use what might be perceived as somebody else's disability to really teach people about alternative ways of moving, alternative ways of balance. We can use it to even strengthen people's practices by helping people see how the body moves in different ways. That's one of the things when you work with somebody at a different age or physical ability level, you see how they can how they move their bodies differently. And that's important because all of us, as we train, as we get older, our bodies start to function differently, maybe not as well as they used to. And all of this stuff, it's about seeing the variety of physical ability and using that as a strength to see how we can, you know, always continue to train actively throughout our lives through different changes that our bodies go through or through different abilities and disabilities. So I think what Stephanie mentioned about perceiving strength within weakness, I think that's crucial. And I think that not only is that a good practice in terms of developing your martial art, I think that's a great practice for developing respect within a community.
Thank you, Nick. Anybody else?
I think the linking to the point of respect is really good, because think about what we're trying to develop in martial artists, not just good martial artists or fighters, but hopefully good people. Nick mentioned this character development through martial arts training. So, and we know in the previous chat we had with our friend Lynn Jekyll, we talked about the meritocracy and effortocracy. So as you mentioned, Nick, so the idea that, well, you work really hard in martial arts, you are valued by the group. You know, if you are respectful, caring, considerate, etc., all these kind of things we value in martial arts, that's probably more important sometimes than actually your skill achievement. Particularly in those martial arts don't have a team selection, and that would create that sense of exclusivity, because you got to, like in say football, you want to be in the first 11, starting 11 on the pitch. It's quite different talking to colleagues working in other kind of physical cultures where they are excluded if they're injured or if they're not fast as they used to be. And whereas martial arts, I think they are very much inclusivity, the idea of lifelong practices. They know that you are going to get a bit slower, or you might pick up more injuries as you get older, but they still want you to take part and be part of the community. So I think that's what values are really important as well.
I was going to come in with a comment there. Yumi, do you have, unless you'd like to say anything? Or shall I go? Oh, go ahead.
Yes, I'll make it very brief. So we talked about a lot of the basic spirit of the martial art, like respect, collaboration, support, and everything. The one thing that I would like to emphasize when we practice and teach the martial art, maybe is the heart to help other people. And the beginning, in the beginning, a lot of people think like martial art is for the self-defense, which is absolutely correct. Yeah, self-defense is the correct, but at the same time, like I believe the initial spirit of the martial art is to help myself, save myself, at the same time to help other people that I love. So we practice martial art to protect myself and the people I love, right? So my people, my partner, my country, and everything. So I think that kind of spirit and mindset should be carried within the martial arts practice to help other people in the class, help people who has disabilities, who without disabilities, help each other, and be really together. I think and that's one of the things that I think should be really emphasized to the people who start the martial art, as well as the people who already has a higher rank of martial art belt, to be collaborated. Am I making sense? Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And to me, and you know, what I hear in that, and something I've observed, you know, facilitating these webinars over the course, the level of respect amongst the speakers and the panelists, which I am, you know, thinking, obviously it's something, you know, that is, I associate now with martial arts from what I can even see, you know, something I always did associate with martial arts, the spirit of martial arts and the respect and the, you know, the discipline there. And I see it even as how you all interact and relate to each other in the space that you all create for each other throughout. And I've seen it on every one of the webinars so far and the discussions, you know, how you all making sure that you each have time to speak and, you know, allowing each other to go first. And that's something, my observation. What I would like to add to that as well is, you know, to when it comes to working with people with disabilities and anybody, you know, really seeing each person as unique and individual. You know, even you can have two people with the same impairment or physical functioning needs or difficulties, and they can be completely different personality wise. They might like to be related to differently. They might have a different perception. And so just realizing that, you know, you can have, there's some principles and tips and strategies you can have, but then to really, you know, moving inside of this place of yourself where you're meeting the needs of the individuals and the group, and trusting your professional intuition inside of that. You know, you get a point where you learn to read the room, you learn to, you learn your participants or your martial artists, and you know, you develop this relationship through the respect and all of that, and you just come to the point where it's a professional intuition, so to say. And so we have one other question here from Carol Roca. I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced. Carol from Mexico, para karate trainer, and she's saying she really appreciates the webinars. She has a son with a hearing impairment, and those of us who have dojos, clubs, can grant scholarships to people with disabilities to give them an opportunity to practice some martial arts. And she's asking, could there be a possibility of creating a fund to support people with limited resources with disabilities? And I'm not sure if that's a question to us or even a question of reflection for each of our attendees who are listening. I think that's a very valid point. And I think, Dr. Jennings, you even mentioned a while ago, you know, that sometimes there are local funds like lottery grants. I know it's a common thing in the UK and even in Ireland. And would anybody like to come in there if you have any advice or experience? Go ahead, Dr. Jennings.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, my point I think was about certain sports. I say at the moment the Olympics are happening, aren't they? Obviously, in Japan. So we've got the IOC and we have the local, obviously the Olympic committees for each country, so national Olympic committees, and they often are funded by either government money or maybe national lottery or some type of fundraising from the public. So maybe I think you could definitely use that, but they'd have to deviate from the Olympic model to be more inclusive of other types of martial arts, because a lot of martial arts aren't Olympic sports. So that might be a limitation for that model. But maybe, you know, I'm not to give you work, Aisling, but maybe UNESCO ICM could be the ones to do this, I think, because they're open to all types of martial arts around the world. And I think maybe there could be some type of fund or advisory thing, but I don't want to tell you what to do, but I think
if Daeyoung, I think Daeyoung is with us. Daeyoung at UNESCO ICM, are you hearing this? Thank you, Dr. Jennings. Anybody else?
It's not in the martial arts exactly, but in a similar vein, I used to work with an NGO that literally just four people with disabilities got together and developed an NGO to promote study abroad for people with disabilities. And we were just 4 people, but even on a small scale, we got ourselves qualified as a not-for-profit, and through kind of some local donations, we were able to raise enough money to do passports for students with disabilities to study abroad. So I think this is, I mean, regardless of the scale, it can be as small or as big, but I think the individual's suggestion is fantastic. And I think it's something that easily can be done, whether it be on a smaller scale in your local kind of area or on a larger scale. But certainly, I think it's a fantastic idea.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Anything to add, Yumi? Or no, you're okay. Thank you.
I think Nick and George covered everything. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you. So we're reaching the point, well, we've gone a few minutes over our webinar. So I really want to thank each of our panelists and all of our attendees for staying with us. It's been a really, really rich conversation, and it's thoroughly enjoyable at my end anyway. And I hope it has been likewise for each of you, for our panelists and everybody listening, as I said. And so our next session, we have another webinar coming up on Thursday in 2 days' time, July 29th. And this one is the coach's perspective. So we're going to be hearing from a lot of different experts in the field that have instructors. We have somebody from the Para Karate Commission who's very much involved with the competition systems at the World Karate Federation there. We have some trainers and educators and coaches. So we have a great lineup there. And so hopefully we'll see you there as well. And so each of our sessions, all of these webinars are also going to be on UNESCO ICM's learning platform and also on the UNESCO Chair's YouTube page. And it has been an absolute joy to be with you all. Thank you, each of you, for those of you who have submitted your questions and for your attention and your interest in this conversation, because I think it's a very important conversation to be having around inclusion. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to each of you. And we wish you a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody. Gracias a todos. Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.